If your money looks normal, your future is in danger. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment because most people have been taught the exact opposite. They think normal is safe. They think normal is responsible. They think if they are roughly in line with everyone around them, then they must be doing fine. I have spent my life around capital, and I can tell you something that most people learn too late. Normal is often a cage. The bars of that cage do not look dramatic when you first see them. They look like an ordinary paycheck, an ordinary apartment, an ordinary car payment, an ordinary grocery bill, an ordinary credit score, an ordinary retirement contribution, an ordinary level of worry that everyone says is just part of adulthood. That is why the average cage is so dangerous. It is not made of panic. It is made of permission. When millions of people live the same way, the mind relaxes. You stop asking whether the system works. You start asking only whether you fit inside it. That is where financial decline becomes socially acceptable. That is where quiet failure puts on a suit and begins calling itself normal. I do not care how many people are trapped. Arithmetic does not become kinder because a crowd is suffering together. If you are earning around the middle of the pack, you are looking at about $52,000 a year before taxes. That sounds respectable to a lot of people. It sounds adult. It sounds stable. Then taxes take their share. Federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, Medicare. By the time the money actually reaches your hands, that neat, respectable number can shrink into something closer to the mid-30s, or around 40,000, depending on where you live. Now ask yourself the question most people avoid: what exactly is that income buying you besides motion? If the money enters your life and immediately leaks into fixed bills, it is not income in the way you imagine. It is fuel being poured straight into someone else's machine. Landlord, lender, insurer, utility company, gas station, restaurant app, subscription stack, tax authority, employer cafeteria, convenience economy. Every hand is waiting. That is the first bar in the cage. Gross income creates a fantasy. Net cash reveals the bars. The average person does not feel poor because of one giant catastrophe. The average person feels squeezed because the air disappears one ordinary payment at a time. Look at the household side of the picture. The average American household spends roughly $67,000 a year. That is about $5,500 a month. Do you understand what that number means? It means the average household has already committed almost every future paycheck before it even arrives. Housing alone eats close to $1,900 a month. Transportation takes roughly another $900. Food absorbs nearly $700 before you have talked about health care, child costs, clothing, gifts, repairs, entertainment, insurance increases, or one stupid emergency. You have already built a room around yourself and locked the door from the inside. I call those cost comfort bars. People hear the word housing and think home. They hear transportation and think freedom. They hear food and think life. Then they look at me strangely when I tell them the same categories can become bars. But a bar is not defined by what it is called. A bar is defined by what it prevents. If your housing cost prevents you from saving, it is a bar. If your transportation cost prevents you from changing jobs, it is a bar. If your food spending is inflated by exhaustion, convenience, and habit, and prevents capital formation, it is a bar. A cage does not need cruelty to function. It only needs enough recurring cost to keep you from building refusal power. That is the phrase I want fixed in your mind. Refusal power, the real purpose of money, is not display. It is not emotional sedation. It is not posting the appearance of progress. The real purpose of money is refusal power. The power to refuse bad debt. The power to refuse a foolish boss. The power to refuse a panicked sale. the power to refuse a move made from desperation, the power to refuse a life built entirely around tomorrow's payroll cycle. Most people do not lack intelligence. They lack refusal power. And because they lack refusal power, they borrow comfort from the future. That is where the next set of bars gets welded into place. The average household carries more than $9,000 of credit card debt. People say that number quickly, as if it were just another statistic. I do not hear a statistic. I hear a tax on impatience, fatigue, and sloppy decision-making. At 20% interest, give or take, that debt can burn around $1,800 a year in interest alone. Think about what that means in plain English. You are not buying things once. You are buying them again and again. Long after the thrill is gone, I have no issue with using a credit card as a payment tool. I have a deep issue with using one as a lifestyle ventilator. If you cannot pay the card in full, the card is not helping you live. It is teaching you to rent your own past decisions. That is a brutal way to live, because interest payments are silent. You do not feel them the way you feel a car purchase or a vacation bill. They just keep clipping pieces off your future, month after month, while you tell yourself you are almost caught up. You never get rich feeding a machine that charges you 20% for the privilege of pretending you are fine. Now let us move to another number people misunderstand. Credit score. The average FICO score is around 715. That sounds solid, and for many people it is. It means a lot of Americans are doing at least enough to avoid complete credit chaos. Bills are getting paid. Utilization is not completely out of control. The file looks passable. But do not make the rookie mistake of confusing a decent credit score with financial strength. A good score can help you borrow cheaply. It cannot make bad habits safe. I have seen plenty of people with respectable scores and weak balance sheets. They can get approved, they can qualify, they can sign. They can look responsible right up until the day they discover they have used their good reputation to finance a fragile life. A decent score should be a tool inside a strong system. It should never be the system itself. The average cage loves cosmetic victories. A good score, a new car, a pleasant kitchen, a credit limit increase, a vacation posted online. None of those things proves freedom. Many of them prove the opposite. That is why I do not start with appearances. I start with net worth. Net worth is the truth serum of personal finance. Everything else can be staged for a while. Net worth eventually tells the truth. What do you own, what do you owe, and what remains after the subtraction? The median household net worth in America is around $122,000. Break it down by age, and you see the shape of the cage more clearly. Under 35, the median is under $14,000. Ages 35 to 44, around $91,000. 45 to 54, around $168,000. 55 to 64, around $212,000. 65 to 74, around $200,000. Good. I am not behind. That reaction is exactly how the cage keeps you. I do not care whether you are slightly ahead of a weak baseline. I care whether your capital is strong enough to defend your life. If you are 34 and your net worth is $14,000, you are not looking at a badge of adulthood. You are looking at a thin margin. You are looking at a life where one major setback can erase years of motion. If you are in your 50s and your net worth is little more than a couple $100,000, you are not in disaster by definition, but you are far closer to vulnerability than the culture admits. This is what people hate hearing. The average outcome has been dressed up for so long that plain arithmetic now sounds offensive. I am not insulting ordinary people. I am warning them. And the ugliest place in this whole picture is retirement. The median amount saved for retirement is about $65,000. Let that sink in. Not $650,000, not $1 million, around $65,000. and about 1/4 of Americans do not even have a retirement account, zero. Nothing set aside in that structure at all. Among younger adults, the numbers are painfully small. Under 25, less than 2,000. Ages 25 to 34, roughly 14,000. Then people imagine time will somehow rescue them. By the time you reach 65 and older, the median retirement balance rises to around 88,000. Most people hear 88,000 and their brain plays a trick on them. It sounds like real money. It is real money. It is also nowhere near the kind of money most people think it is. Use a traditional 4% withdrawal rule and you get around $3,500 a year, less than $300 a month, $300 a month. That is not a retirement plan. That is grocery support. That is utility support if you are lucky. That is not the kind of capital that buys a dignified exit from wage dependence. The average cage does something very dangerous here. It takes a large-sounding pile and hides the tiny stream it actually produces. This is one of the oldest tricks in finance. People look at stock values, home values, retirement account balances, and they react emotionally to the pile. Mature investors react to the stream. They ask what the pile can safely produce without self-destruction. A pile can impress your neighbor. A stream has to carry your life. And if your stream is tiny, the pile was never as protective as you imagined. That is where Social Security enters the story. And this is another place where the average person starts bargaining with reality. The average monthly Social Security benefit is around $1,550, around $18,600 a year. For some people that will be lower, for a few it will be better. But the big point is not whether the number is impossible. The point is what kind of life it can support when layered on top of weak savings and rising costs. I am not one of those people who enjoys building a plan around political promises that may tighten, shift, or disappoint. I prefer systems that remain sound even when outside help comes in late or comes in smaller than hoped. Treating Social Security as a floor can be understandable. Treating it as the whole house is how you end up frightened every time you read the news, and then comes the timing problem. The average retirement age is around 61. Full Social Security benefits generally arrive later, around 67. So the average person who leaves work around 61 may need to bridge 6 years before full benefits begin. 6 years is not an errand. 6 years is a real capital problem, especially if you retire with the kind of balance the median person retires with. Now add one more fact. Reach 65, and there is a decent chance you still have 19 to 21 years of life ahead of you. Retire earlier, and you may be funding 25 years or more. This is where the average cage becomes almost cruel. People spend nearly 4 decades working, then arrive at the finish line with a balance sheet that cannot comfortably fund the back half of life. That is not a victory lap. That is a bridge built out of optimism. I do not say that to depress you. I say it because I want you to stop confusing the common outcome with a wise one. The average person is not your model. The average person is your warning label. There is also a psychological poison hidden in all this. Social comparison. You lie awake wondering whether other people your age have more money. Then you scroll social media and see travel, cars, remodels, dinners, upgrades, designer bags, smiling kids, and captions about gratitude. You assume those images reflect strength. Very often they reflect financing, timing, selective posting, and stress that never made it into the picture. Comparison theater is one of the strongest metals in the cage. It convinces people to imitate visible spending instead of invisible strength. You do not build wealth by matching what other people display. You build wealth by quietly building the structures they do not show. Emergency reserves, lower fixed costs, high savings rates, low cost index exposure, controlled debt, strong credit behavior without lifestyle creep. More skill, more bargaining power, more ownership, more patience. The average cage hates quiet progress because quiet progress does not entertain the crowd. The average person saves about 6% of after-tax income. 6%, that sounds harmless until you apply it to a real life. Houses need down payments, cars wear out, kitchens break. Children arrive, medical bills show up, careers wobble, parents age. If 6% has to absorb short-term goals and long-term goals at the same time, then long-term freedom is being starved almost by definition. That is why I tell people to stop asking whether they are doing better than average. That question is too small. Ask whether your capital is growing faster than your obligations. Ask whether your fixed costs are rising slower than your income. Ask whether your savings rate is strong enough to create distance between you and panic. Ask whether your investments are actually productive assets or just money hiding in low-yield comfort. Most people do not need a genius strategy. They need a stronger threshold. And this is where the conversation usually becomes uncomfortable, because the escape path requires decisions that threaten your identity. You may need to live in a smaller place than your peer group thinks is normal. You may need to drive a less impressive car than your income can technically qualify for. You may need to stop using dining out, delivery, and shopping as emotional anesthesia. You may need to redirect tax refunds, raises, bonuses, and side income into ownership instead of reward. You may need to treat every recurring bill as a claim against your future freedom and judge it accordingly. You may need to raise your income deliberately, not with hope, but with skill, negotiation, mobility, and the willingness to leave weak incentives behind. That is why I say the average cage is not just economic. It is psychological. It punishes deviation from normal before it rewards independence. If you live below your means, some people will think you are timid. If you avoid debt, some people will think you are too conservative. If you invest steadily in plain low-cost index funds instead of chasing stories, some people will think you are boring. If you keep your housing and transportation costs under control, some people will think you are not enjoying life. Ignore them. A lot of people are enjoying themselves straight into a weak old age. I have never seen arithmetic impressed by taste. Now, let me tell you what I would do if I were trying to break this cage from the inside. First, I would stop using average as emotional comfort. I would use it as a baseline to beat. The moment you see that median worker income, median retirement balances, average household spending, average savings rates, and average debt levels are producing fragile outcomes, you should stop seeking emotional safety and similarity. Second, I would create distance between take-home pay and take-home spending. That means attacking the biggest bars first: housing and transportation. You can save a little on coffee and feel virtuous, but the cage is usually welded together by the big fixed numbers, not the tiny rituals. A slightly smaller home cost and a slightly saner transportation bill can free thousands of dollars a year. That is where breathing room begins. Third, I would destroy high-interest revolving debt before talking proudly about investing. It makes no sense to boast about a 7 or 8% expected return while paying 20% to a card company. That is not investing. That is financial cosplay. Fourth, I would build an emergency reserve that buys time. Time is the hidden asset in every good financial decision. Without time, you sell under pressure, borrow under pressure, accept bad terms under pressure, and work under pressure. A cash buffer is not laziness. It is a key saw for the bars. Fifth, I would push my retirement saving rate above the average with absolute seriousness. Not because retirement is some distant fantasy, but because every extra percentage point of saving today becomes future refusal power. If most people are saving 6%, then a person saving 12, 15 or more is not making acute improvement. He is building a different life. Sixth, I would treat Social Security as support, not rescue. If it arrives, fine. If it is smaller than hoped, my structure still stands. Dependence is a bad negotiating position, even when the counterparty is the government. Seventh, I would invest in assets that can compound quietly for a long time. I have said for years that low-cost broad index funds are a perfectly sensible answer for most people, not because they are exciting, but because they let disciplined behavior do the heavy lifting. Most fortunes are not built by brilliance. They are built by long obedience to sensible rules. Eighth, I would remember that a credit score is not a trophy. Good credit should reduce friction in a good system. It should not become an excuse to finance more bars. Ninth, I would measure progress by net worth and cash flow resilience, not by visible consumption. Net worth is silent. Freedom is silent. Refusal power is silent. The cage is noisy. That is one reason so many people mistake the noise for success. Finally, I would stop asking the lazy question, which is whether I am better off than most people my age. That question flatters the ego and weakens the strategy. I would ask the hard question, if my income stopped tomorrow, how long would my life remain orderly? If markets fell hard, would I be forced to sell? If my boss insulted my standards, could I walk away? If a real opportunity appeared, would I have cash, credit, and calm, or only excuses? That is a serious life. That is a capital allocator's life. You do not need to beat the whole country in one leap. You need to beat the average in the areas that matter most, and do it repeatedly. Earn a little more than average, spend a little less than average, save much more than average, carry much less debt than average, invest far more consistently than average, think much longer term than average. One of the most powerful ideas in finance is that small advantages, repeated over long periods, stop looking small. That is true in business. It is true in investing. It is true in personal finance. A few percentage points added to savings, a few years of early investing, a few avoided debt traps, a few calm decisions in bear markets. Those do not remain minor. Time magnifies discipline gaps the same way it magnifies bad habits. That is why the average cage is not broken by one heroic act. It is broken by repeated refusal. Refuse the housing payment that colonizes your future. Refuse the car deal that converts your income into image. Refuse the card balance that rents your past back to you. Refuse the spending pattern that leaves retirement to luck. Refuse the social comparison that confuses visibility with strength. Refuse the idea that normal is acceptable, just because it is common. The average person may retire at 61 and spend the next years trying to stretch weak savings, lean on Social Security, and hope the math behaves kindly. You do not have to sign that contract. The average household may spend almost everything it makes and call that maturity. You do not have to sign that contract. The average saver may put away 6% and wonder why the future still feels unstable. You do not have to sign that contract. The average borrower may hand over interest for the privilege of looking comfortable today. You do not have to sign that contract. I am not interested in teaching you how to decorate the cage. I am interested in teaching you how to recognize it while the door is still open, because that is the final truth most people miss. The bars feel lightest when you are young enough to escape. They feel heaviest when your options narrow, your habits harden, and the compounding you delayed is no longer willing to forgive you. So here is the test. Look at your life as it stands today. Look at your income after taxes. Look at your monthly burn. Look at your debt. Look at your retirement balance. Look at your savings rate. Look at the gap between what your money could do and what it is currently doing. Then answer me honestly, are you building refusal power, or are you just learning to live gracefully inside the average cage? That answer will determine more than your balance sheet. It will determine who gets to make the important decisions in your life, you or the bars. And if that question stings, good pain is often the moment the door becomes visible.